Hi guys, we are going to do the park bench only in spring. So it is the spring park bench and I'm going to take you down. I'm doing this on an 8 by 10 canvas board. It's adaptable to most any size. And we're going to get started in just a second. Going to tell you, let's see if I can find us, it'd be great. The colors that I'm going to use for this, you're going to need white, black, colonial blue, medium Hauser green, and light Hauser green. There's the two of them. A brown, and a pink. Or we can make a pink with red and white. Let's see if I can find. Okay, there we are. So in the winter version of this, we had this gray blue sky in the back, and then came to our foreground where we had the snow-covered bench and our little visitor. I want this to be spring-like, so we're not going to have quite as dark of a background. But we are going to go ahead and still be using the blue that we used before, which is the colonial blue. I'm just dampen my brush. I'm going to pick up quite a bit of white and a little bit of the colonial blue and make a really, really light grayish blue. And I'm going to start that at the top of my canvas. I am painting on a craft mat, so I don't really care if I get a little messy. But if you were worried about that, you could put a piece of plastic underneath your work surface. It would work well too. Grab what I'm looking for. Right there. And I'm just going to get a little lighter as I go down toward my ground. I'm just adding white. Blends really easy with lots of paint in my brush. And I'm just going to make this about where my ground is going to be. Maybe a little there. And I'm going to make the bottom a little more on the gray side. So I'm going to pick up that white and the blue, maybe just a touch of black. That black looks sad. It looks like it needs to be shook up. Just give me another puddle of white. And let's shake up that black. Whenever your paint separates like that, it most likely is that it has not been shook up well. See the difference there? So I've got this little blue and white on my brush. I'm going to pick up just a tiny bit to just gray it out a little more. That's going to be where my ground is going to be. There'll be lots of spring-like things happening there. But I want to have a good base coat. Now I want to have some background trees similar to what I did in the winter scene. So I'm going to rinse my brush out. And I'm going to pick up a very, very little bit of brown. Little watery. If your paint is watery, you're going to tap it to your paper towel. And I'm going to see if I can just lay in a couple ideas of some branch type trees in the background. I think I'm too wet. I think I might have to dry this first. Let's do that. We're going to give it a quick blow dry. Actually, what I think I'm going to do is just go with a smaller brush. So this is about an 8 flat. I'm going to pull that paint, push down on both sides so I have a nice chisel edge. And then I should be able to these are just going to be a couple little ideas of some background trees. We're going to have some other ones, so just little bits of them. Not even the trees that you're going to see much happening on, but just the idea that there's trees in our background. Now let's go ahead and find a brush that's probably been a little well loved. So a little scruffier brush. If you don't have one, you can always use something like a pouncing brush, but I have a few brushes that have been at least partially well loved. Let me grab this one here. See by that I mean it's a little more flared out. And I'm going to pick up some of my Lighthouser green. And I'm just going to kind of tap that where my horizon line is going to start showing up. All the way across. Because it's spring. We're going to have some more of those green colors popping in our background. I'm also going to hit a couple of them up here. It's still a little wet and it's just a little bits of tap. They're not like defining trees at all. They're just a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of the Hauser Green Medium, which is a little darker. I'm just going to pull a little more down here. So be behind my park bench. Just a little bit. The darker color here too. My park bench is going to be about here. I'm going to have a big branch coming over here that has some bright spring flowers on it. So let's go ahead and tap in a little bit of the darker green up in here too. Again, I'm not trying to make these particular trees. I'm just the idea that if we looked at a park bench, we'd probably see some foliage off to this side. We're going to see a big branch with color coming over here. And I'll add that branch after we get our park bench in. Okay, so far, so good. This is the point I'm going to put my pattern on, so I am going to hit it with a blow dryer so it's nice and dry. Out of the way. So I have my park bench on a piece of tracing paper. I like to have it on tracing paper. That way I can, if I need to lay that back down, I can. I'm probably not going to be adding our bird on this one, but let's just lay our park bench down. And then I'm going to use some graphite paper. Graphite paper comes in different colors. This one just happens to be black. It's a pretty big piece. I don't need a piece that big, but we're going to use it anyhow. And I'm going to grab a stylus. If you don't have a stylus, you can use something like a pencil or a pen that just don't use this one. I don't have the lead out on it. Or you can go over it with a ballpoint pen too. So I'm just going to lift and put the shiny side of my graphite down. Make sure I've got it underneath what I want to trace. So I'm going to take that stylus or the empty ballpoint pen, and I'm going to go over just the lines that I need. But in this case, we're actually going to need these lines. I'm going to need all the lines that I see that are the park bench wrought iron. And you do those first. One nice thing about going over it with a pen or a pencil, if you're using one with ink or lead, is you can see which lines you've done. But because I'm using tracing paper, if when I pick it up I've missed a line, I can lay it back down and easily find where I need to go. I usually peek right away to make sure I can see that it's dark enough, and this is. Use this line. When you're tracing on a pattern, you only put on the lines you absolutely needed. If this had a lot of detail on it, let's say we had words on it, I wouldn't put the words on until I had the base of the bench on. I think I have it. I think I'm good. Oh, I feel like I'm missing something right here. I don't think I did the backs of the boards. Better. Okay, remove that. Our next step is going to be to take the black and a smaller brush, like a small round or a detail brush. This will do. And I'm going to fill in all the wrought iron. So that would be the arms and legs. In the winter version of this, most of this gets covered up. But now that it's spring, we're going to make sure that we have all the wrought iron and its little details showing. And we wouldn't want to put our pattern on for our bench until we do our background. Sometimes helpful to have your photo if you have the photo of the picture. So like when we come back in here in just a moment, we're going to be adding some highlights to that wrought iron so we can see its separation a little bit. And sometimes it's just very helpful to have that pattern with you. Now your back wrought iron is going to be smaller because it's further away. And a pattern is a guide. It is not a life sentence, so if you feel like a line is a little off, you can always change it. I tend to provide patterns or tracers from the piece once I actually do it. And in this case, we are doing this for the first time. I feel like there should be another bar in here. So we're going to add one. Okay. So that's the wrought iron part of it. Now to give it a little separation, character, I've rinsed my brush out and I'm going to pick up some white paint. And I'm just going to pick some spots where I want it to be more highlighted. So maybe it's a little more in here, back up in here, top of the front there, in the front of the front leg, down the one side of the back. And we'll do the same thing up here. If we're going to think that we're going to have a branch coming here, so it's going to be a little more shaded. So it'll be a little more shaded on the back side, and so the front of it we can give a little more touches of highlights. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing, just little bits of it to kind of help give it a little pop. And because my paint is still wet, it's blending in pretty easily. Okay, so on our winter bench, we did it in red, but we're going to be having a nice pink flowery branch coming down here. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to still start base coating my bench with a little bit of black. I'm going to pull black from the edges in where my boards are. And this can be very sketchy. That's my space. And then we have here, we have another board and another board and a board that comes from this edge and from this edge. I'm going to put just a little bit in the middle of them. Looks really weird, doesn't it? Rinse your brush from the black and go into your brown. And we're going to make this a brown bench. So we're just going to fill it back in, go right over those black parts, because what that will do is it'll actually give you some automatic shading. There is space between those two boards in the back, that are the back of the bench. And when we do our boards on the bottom too, there should be a little bit of space between each of the boards. And if there's not, don't worry, we can come back and sneak a little gray color in there and it'll look like we left space. It doesn't have to be a big gap, just a tiny little line. That's why we can easily come back with a gray and just sneak that in. I think that's really would be what I do. I think it might be easier to do that. Okay. Sure, we have enough brown on there. And I can either sneak the gray in, or I could just pick up a little bit of black just on that one edge, and I can decide that this is going to be darker on the front of this board. And the next one will be darker in the front of it as well. Just lay that color right on the very front of the board. Then let's go ahead and use a liner brush or small round. I'm going to make a really light gray with a little bit of black and lots of white. Just a tiny, tiny little line. Oops, tinier than that. All right, so we have, excuse me, we have our bench in there. We need it to be, so I'm gonna bring the branch here in just a moment, but I need there to be a little darker underneath where the bench is because that's where the shadow is gonna be. So I'll go back and pick up some of that blue and white that we used, but it could be a little darker and just gonna be underneath the bench where it would be shadowed. So definitely underneath each of the little leg parts, underneath the bench. And I have a little bit of green in my brush, but that's okay. So make sure, create more shadow. Okay. And I might even shadow up a little more over here too, just to give it. We're gonna go ahead and go back into a brown with our smaller brush. And I'm gonna come off to the side here, and I'm gonna think of a branch that's gonna come from a tree over here. The tree is off of our picture, but I want to have some branches that are going to have some pretty pink flowers on them. So we're going to just do like little V's that come off of the branches. They're going to get smaller. They get further away from the main trunk, which is over here somewhere. You could even pull a whole tree in here if you wanted to. I might pull so you can see a little more of it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to pull it so I'm seeing just part of the tree. That way I can have some branches come up this way too. If you need to switch to a smaller brush, by all means. Always use the brush that's most comfortable for you. Now I'm doing this with a small round or a detail brush, but you can also, let me show you, if you use a flat with a good chisel edge, you can push down and get really skinny lines with just the chisel part of your brush too. I want it there to be a little definition in my tree. So I'm going to pick up a little gray. Oops, too gray, too gray. Maybe we should go black. Let's just go black. I'm going to do a couple little lines of black in my tree here and there. It looks a little more bark-like. I'm going to go back to that very well-loved brush that I had, and I'm going to pick up the medium green, and I'm going to lay some down. I'm very lightly tapping this on. I'm not pouncing this hard. I'm just very lightly tapping some of this greenery on here because this is going to be mostly flowers going to be showing through. But we have to have leaves in there too. Just lightly tapping this on. Add as much or as little as you want. Rinse that out well. Go ahead and go into your pink color. This is my Joyful Pink. And I'm going to use a round brush for this, just a small round brush. And I'm going to start with the darker color. I've just got it on my brush, and I'm literally just going to tap these bits of color all over. I like to call these blobs. In the fall, we call them flobs. Now, I'm not washing my brush. I'm picking up some pink, some white to make a lighter color. And I'm going to go back into the dark. Back into my white. And I'm just tapping these colors. Pretty pink flowers in this tree. Going right over my branches. If you wanted to be more specific, you could set this down, pick it up, do them in little clumps. I like going back and forth in my colors because then I get a nice variety of them changing. And it's not like I just have one pink and one dark pink. Lots and lots of shades happening here. If you wanted to add a little bit of those pinks over in your faint trees, you take most of that off on your paper towel and you could just tap in a few of them in the background, but very, very lightly. Okay. Add as many as you want. I'm going to add to this guy, I'm going to add a couple little containers, I think, of flowers. Let's see. I think we'll have some flowers here and some flowers right here. So I'm going to start off by using a gray. And use my little flat. So my grays can be black, white, can have a little bit of that blue in it. It's going to get filled up and overflowing, so I'm not going to worry too much about it, but we're just going to think about a container that would sit about here, okay? There's our container. And we're going to have one sitting right about here too. This is just so we know where our flowers are going to be coming out of. Okay? And go back to your little fluffy brush and a combination of your greens. And we're going to tap some greenery. Slowing down them. My paint is still wet. Let that dry for just a second or two. Make sure that I've got some of that there's shadow underneath them. Get some green. And hit that with a blow dryer so we can add our other greenery and other flowers to that. And add some more green before I put in my pinks. Into my darker green. Bring some of the darker green and bring some of it further up because that's what my flowers are going to be sitting in. So this is my dark green. Hazard green medium is my dark for this one. Okay. Maybe pick up a little bit of white just so we have some variations of some colors in there. We'll come back and we'll add our pink in just a bit. Pick up a little bit of, just a little bit of black on the corner of my brush, just at the very bottom of these containers. A little sketchy underneath them too. Shading. Let that dry. While that's drying, let's go back and use our smaller round or detail brush. I'm going to just pull something up in here. Let's go ahead and pull us another tree. Trees that are right about here. Let's just a little darker line. Go ahead and add some branches to these. Very lightly, because we'll add a couple more, a little more greenery on top of them, but there's the edge of the park, and they're not sitting on the park walkway, they're at the edge. Tap in a little bit of greenery on top of those, or a little bit of pink. Keep it light. Why don't you pick up a little bit of the white? Maybe there's some little more whitish flowers on these. And we should be able to blot on our pinks and our light pinks. So these are just, I'm gonna make these a little more like maybe roses in a pot or pink peonies in a pot. But I am going to use both the strong pink and the lighter pink. I can go back and forth. I'm going to take a peek at your ones up in the tree. Do we need any more? You can decide how far down they're hanging. You can even bring a branch that's coming right over your bench. And I didn't think I was going to add my little birdie in this one. I think I'm just going to leave it as this park bench. So then it just becomes a time of tweaking up a few things, like making sure your park bench might look like it's got a couple little boards in it. Or not boards, lines. So it looks more like wood. We'll add a couple little lines in it. Just kind of clean up some edges. A little more black down the front edge of the front board. And we have a spring bench. So we painted the winter bench, and now we have a spring bench. We'll have to do one in the fall too. Thanks so much.